Meeting hadn't started. I just was seeing a little swirly thing. How was everybody? Tired? I'm tired.
You had a big day yesterday, Senator.
There was a lot going on all week. So yeah, kind of taking it easy so far this morning. All right. So I think Haley and I chatted a little bit after the meeting last night. We didn't have a sort of usual agenda that we usually walk through, and we didn't really think that we needed to. I think we kind of know all those things in terms of what's coming next for the work groups and such, and really thought it might be more appropriate to spend, you know, the half hour or so that we have together kind of debriefing on the meeting itself, just sort of structurally and the feedback that we received. And then I think the most important thing really is that there were a lot of things that were said, both verbally and in the chat, that we were looking to capture, and just wanted to make sure that we could, you know, just follow up on those to make sure that we could be responsive to some of the questions that were left hanging out. And honestly, there were, I think, particularly in the public comment, there was even sort of request of us monitor some things. So just really wanted to just have more of an open conversation, and then, you know, talk about some of those items that surfaced in the meeting, and sort of plan to organize and respond to those quickly. So that's really it. Does anyone want to start with any particular thoughts? People who were willing to be vocal sort of in that moment, like in the meeting itself, and even a couple of people who texted me, I got positive feedback. They weren't necessarily people I was surprised to get positive feedback from, because they were definitely people that I know in this space who are, you know, eager to see those more open conversations happen. So it didn't surprise me that they were happy, but I was glad that they were happy and not critical of the way that it kind of rolled out, in terms of not going far enough or anything like that. So that was reassuring. Didn't necessarily hear anything from folks who might be in the more reticent camp about it. So I don't know, you know, folks felt pushed too far into spaces that they weren't comfortable. I suspect they were just quiet in that moment. And I guess we will see. Haley and I did discuss that it is recorded, and that we did intend to post it to Facebook, because I think there was a lot in that conversation that was worth making sure that, you know, the consortium members who weren't in attendance, which was almost half of them, and
A lot of them ended up back on, Tizzy.
oh, did they? Did we get pretty close? That's right. I guess we were 13 at the beginning, and then
I think we only didn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people.
Bit of our chronic absentee people who we need to have. Yeah, we need to sort of review that. Maybe it's a good time to do that sort of attendance review, you know, the chart that we do where we sort of see who's usually there and who's not been there for the past, you know, for the calendar year so far. Mm-hmm. I think I could predict that. And, but okay, that's good. Actually, that's a little bit reassuring, because I wasn't really thinking about the additions that arrived as we went on, which does usually happen. But I forget where I was going with that.
Sorry.
I
said sorry. I think you were talking about posting and just making sure.
Oh, yeah.
Was,
putting it up on Facebook, in part for any consortium members who weren't able to attend. But I also think that it's just a good way to engage folks in the conversations that we're having. And I do think a lot of important information was shared. And I think there was some useful dialogue, even pushing back on that, pushing back on the state agencies' work to the extent that, you know, in a way that I think is something that we should be doing as a consortium, or something that we should be revealing things that we can help to improve. So, go ahead, Tika.
one of
No,
the
you're good.
the feedback that I received from folks is that they would like to see it YouTube streamed.
Oh, yeah.
Like instead of the recording and then you wait for the posting or trying to find where it's posted, but they asked me if we had a YouTube channel where we could stream it through.
Yeah, and there's definitely precedent for that. I mean, we probably could ask the department how they do it. Because I know like when we were doing the equity or the school reopening subcommittees, that was how that worked. And so it seems like it's a pretty straightforward, the technology of it, that Zoom can do that. But I think that is good if we want to create more access. I think we were being cautious in part because we're still kind of new to the technology. And also I think because of the nature of what was being discussed last night and we weren't sure how people were going to engage with it. We decided to stay conservative on that. But I mean, I would have been comfortable this time. I know we erred on the side of caution. I would be comfortable moving forward, but I'm happy to hear, any contradictions around that. But I think it's definitely worth looking into, Haley, if that's something you want to explore, the technology of doing it. We might get more engaged. And actually, you're right. If we put it on Facebook, we can then sort of cross-post it to Facebook from YouTube. I'm sorry. If we put it on YouTube, we can then cross-post it to Facebook pretty easily. So it might be better just to focus on that. Thank you. That's a good suggestion. Tika, you were very engaged in the meeting last night. Do you have any particular feelings? It was a packed meeting, but
I know I always feel bad saying so much, but
no, it's great.
Cut other folks off, but I think it went well. I think it was almost like two separate conversations, but I think we kind of also knew that. And so like Monique's piece, I think would have been a whole separate piece and had more time. But I think with the amount of time that she had to work with, I think she used it very effectively.
Yeah.
And I think it was a great surface to not feel like, oh, well, you're just kind of touching on this topic and then wrapping it back up. But just to say that we want to be clear on definitions and starting at that level, I think was good. I think people had a lot more questions about the CARES Act and really how that's playing out, that wanted to drive the conversation. So that's where I'm saying that maybe it would have been a little better served having them two separate, but I think it went really well.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Even I think I saw Noelle. I don't know if you're on, but if you had any thoughts, you were very engaged too, obviously.
Yeah, I guess I did feel like I thought we were going to go a little more in depth in the racial equity discussion and maybe have more discussion like in small groups or something like that. It seemed more like a superficial, like this is the terms that we're going to use and this is the information, which personally I don't think really does deep work. And I would like to see in the future there being some more engaged, deep work discussions. To me, the way we had talked about it was like we were going to have these uncomfortable conversations, and I didn't feel like any of that was getting into anything uncomfortable. And I think that if we don't get uncomfortable, I heard a quote this morning where they were saying, we have to move towards discomfort, otherwise going to change. Like we have to really embrace and move towards discomfort because it's the politics of comfort that keeps inequity in place. So personally, I would have liked to have more discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, and we did, I don't know if you were part of our planning. It was definitely intentional design. I mean, I think the word racism came in probably later in the 20 minutes than I would have necessarily wanted it, but I think it was very intentional. I think she knows what she's doing. I definitely think she knows what she's doing, obviously. And we did sort of ask her to make it a stepping stone towards uncomfortable conversations, because we definitely didn't have the intention of sort of doing breakout session deep dive stuff specifically in the public meeting. But we wanted to give people really a heads up and some terminology to work with, because really some people are coming from zero, I think. I mean, that's just what we wanted to assume, that a lot of people weren't as ready as I think many of us even on this call, but everyone is in a different place. So we wanted to do that both for the group and for the public. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely shared that. I mean, I was just honestly tense over timing probably more than anything, which I tend to do when I'm facilitating the meeting. But yeah, I would have probably gotten to some of the later slides sooner if it were me, but I don't know if that would have had any kind of backlash to it either. So I definitely trusted Monique. And we definitely want her biggest thing, and I probably dropped off the call when perhaps she said this to everyone, is that the most important thing is that it's not a conversation with closure, that it's sort of an introduction to something that we have to commit to maintaining. And we did that. So
I don't understand, and I know that like this, honestly, this whole world is very different for me. Like I'm used to being with 50 kids, so like the whole legislative world and the political world is very different for me, and I appreciate being part of this because I know you want to have a teacher who's part of this. But what kind of backlash are you worried about?
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, I think really, I think I've certainly been part of conversations where, oh, hi, Fran, where people really shut down when pushed it in ways that they're not ready. And actually, that was something that Monique really emphasized. She really, really emphasized, and she's done a lot of work in districts and with folks who have not engaged in those conversations, but the importance of not doing harm that ends up essentially shutting down dialogue. I think there have been examples of that. I mean, honestly, there have been public examples of that in school board meetings and things like that sometimes, where folks are just on very different parts of the spectrum of having conversations about racial justice. And it can, I believe it can actually kill progress on policy issues, which is of course what we're about. If people, and I actually have legislative colleagues who have confided in me about their fears about engaging in those conversations. And so I think it becomes this very careful walk you have to do between, like, you don't want to dilute something to the point of not being effective, but you also don't want to overdo it to the point of not being effective.
Right.
So I don't necessarily know the answer, but that is definitely the line that I personally feel that I would like to walk, because I want us to be effective. I want us to come up with, have conversations that people feel enriched by, that lead to policies that we can actually get through the legislature. And a lot of my legislative colleagues, I think, probably fall more on that spectrum of having a lot of fear around these conversations.
Yeah.
This, to Noelle's point, is kind of like if not now, then when? So like when would be the right time to have those conversations? So I am on board with having those conversations. I didn't anticipate necessarily having them last night, or think that was the forum, based on knowing that she only had 20 minutes. So because it's a topic that I'm very passionate about, I don't want to start a conversation and not even scratch the surface. So that's why I do think, given that amount of time, just trying to come to a uniform definition would have been helpful. But that's where I'm hoping that everyone will be on board with engaging in a retreat where we can actually sit and have some time, because it will require people to be vulnerable and share some of that uncomfortableness. And that was also too why I asked if it needed to be a public meeting, because some people might not feel comfortable sharing some things because it's in public and opening up that way. But I think for them, we need to kind of still walk with that. So it's like, you're still pushing them forward, but you also need to have a safe space for them to do that as well.
Yeah. So I think respecting that, Noelle, you are extremely, I think, well-versed and immersed in those conversations. So I can definitely imagine how it must be frustrating for you to feel like it's like, all right, we have to sort of take this to this level. But I do think it's important to respect that. I was glad to hear Monique kind of voice that, but I think she would still say things that folks would probably consider challenging. But she was also very aware of what that harm can do, and that, not just thinking about the harm of having a conversation about racism, even, on folks who might be perceived as perpetrators of it. And I think that's cool. And I think it's important when you're doing something that is a collaborative and deliberative process that you do have to embrace all those points of view and differing levels of readiness. And I think doing it will help us, just helps help set the stage to actually get things done. And I think obviously our priority is to enable the members of the consortium, the members of the work groups, to be able to be conversant in that, so that the policy solutions that are pushed are, influenced at least by an understanding of those dynamics. And so I think that's kind of where we start. And then we, of course, we also see our consortium really as a collection of folks who not only are going to be proposing, policy ideas, but also advancing them, advocating for them. So we're going to need a group of folks who are speaking the same language, and can translate some of these ideas and the importance of these ideas to whoever it's going to be that's going to be voting on them, whether they're school board members or legislators. And so I don't think it's going to be an overnight thing that we can do. It's really just going to have to be an undercurrent of, these are words we need to know, these are thoughts we need to be confronting, and we have resources to continually dive into that in different ways, whether it's a retreat, whether it's like, call us up, we'll connect you to Monique, you can have a one-on-one, those kinds of things. So, but it'll be interesting. I think I'll have to talk to some of the folks who were not super vocal, and just kind of who were there, and just kind of get a feel for how they left the meeting feeling.
Yeah, I think just, my part of being in this, I feel like too, is that I have a very close connection with children. So
yeah,
I think the frustration for me comes not out of being part of these conversations, but first of all, from being part of a lot of conversations around race, I can also say I see white folks all the time be uncomfortable, grapple with this, and then move through it in a productive way. We don't have to back off and handhold people. And my frustration comes from, I'm with children every day who are suffering the effects of racist policies, who only have one childhood. And I am more concerned about that, and if we can stay student focused on those outcomes rather than people focusing on the politics and what their feelings are, I think if we can prioritize that and look at it as like a resources allocation, policies that are going to benefit the children, and maybe take our feelings out of it some, that would help. And I appreciate your perspective, because I know you're dealing with political things in a way that I don't know anything about, but also for a lot of people who are used to being with adults.
Oops, oh no. Okay, hopefully she'll get back on. I agree, Kelly, the Chiefs were very quiet, but I also think they're very exposed to these conversations, and the full range of views on them.
And they're dealing with a lot right now.
And they're dealing with a lot right now.
Colonial had just put out that they were going virtual, like right before the meeting. So
Which one?
Colonial.
Oh, that they're sort of stepping down on
Yeah.
They had for William Penn, but okay. Yeah, there's been so many school board meetings, I cannot
I know.
keep up.
I saw it this morning. I was like, oh, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But
Their plan with William Penn, I don't think is changing, but they did have to downgrade, if you want to use that word, their options for families, they said at this time.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I thought that was good. I think obviously we don't have to start this plan today, but I do think we need to be thinking, as a planning team, how do we help the work groups and the overall consortium to continue, is it some kind of provision of resources? Do we figure out the FOIA friendly way to have safe conversational spaces? And we've already started having some of those conversations. So I think that'll be something we do when we're not meeting next Friday, but when we start to reconvene again after that, and we'll probably have some one-on-ones. What does that look like to continue that conversation? but I thought it was, you know, a fair start. And there are probably people on that call who've literally seen those PowerPoints 1,000 times. That probably is the most true of the superintendents, to be honest. But it's sort of like, what do you do with it? How do you keep it going? And yeah, without it sort of overwhelming everything, which I think is a very hard thing, but we'll see. I agree that the CARES Act conversation felt like it could have been, oh yeah, Haley, before I move on, you said Erin had a thought?
Well, we were emailing about the possibility of having a retreat, and he sent back like kind of a not super complicated legal answer, but a lot of information.
This is Erin Goldstein, not Bass, in case anyone's wondering.
Yes, Erin Goldstein from the AG's office. And wait, Noelle said her computer died. Oh, she has another meeting to run to at 11.
Sorry, no, we got you. We hear you. We sort of tried to reinforce it after you dropped.
But I can sort of send Erin's response around and just see how people interpret it. I mean, I think from what he was saying, we would be able to have a retreat privately, because he was sort of saying that if you're talking about things that would move the like consortium agenda forward and things like that, that it would need to be public. But this, it's more of an internal conversation. We're not making any decisions. We're not voting on anything. Like it seems like we would be able to do it. But I think I'll share that with people because I just want to see how everyone interprets it.
Cool. Okay. So yes, so on the CARES Act, I definitely thought it was interesting to hear the Equity Office report. I don't know what you guys thought. And, you know, hear the CARES Act report. I think it would be worth asking them to return or perhaps have some kind of a recurring time slot to do that. You know, it was interesting to hear them say things like, oh, we're drawing from your definition of equity. I mean, I think there's definitely a relationship there between our existence as a consortium focused on equity and the fact that they've changed their design to focus on equity. You know, and I'll reach out to them today to see how they are feeling after the conversation. But I mean, I thought the challenges and the asks were good and productive and made me feel like we as a consortium are stepping up, you know, to have high expectations of the state equity office, which I think is appropriate.
I think it would be good to have them back because, you know, Ray had a really good question to have him respond to, which also brings me up to like a couple of questions people would put in the chat or things that people have said to me that they were going to make public comment. And so they felt like public comment, and I actually don't think that this is just something with our group. I actually agree with this with a lot of public groups, but that public comment is just that, and that it's just left there, and that it's pretty much swept under the rug so people don't actually feel heard because there's never any consideration, there's never response, it doesn't go anything until basically a record. And so it was thought that not necessarily every public comment would need that, but where we have record of different points, I think last night someone had a question about something, but if we could try and still address that, to put some, whether we acknowledge that we heard that and we're looking into seeing if we can get a response or bringing someone back the next meeting that can speak to that. But at some point, whenever we have our next meetings, kind of addressing some of the things that people had mentioned at the last meeting so they don't feel like their comments just are that and then they just fall deaf.
I totally agree. And one of the things I honestly, I forget what Amy's ask specifically was in her public comment, but I've had an ongoing conversation with her so I could guess. But Sarah Green had made a specific comment about monitoring some of these expenditures, which I thought was helpful. I mean, I thought it was a very fair point to say, you know, and obviously I think we'd already sort of indicated that with the funding work group and the capacity that we have. But I think she sort of reiterated that, like, can't you guys be monitoring this and letting us know kind of what's going on? or at least sort of monitoring DOE's assertion to do so. And I think that's a fair request and ask and use of our capacity. I don't know if that's something we need to sort of propose and vote on as a group, but I think, yeah, that we saved the chat. The chat was very porous in the sense that like, it wasn't just, we didn't say you can only comment in it if you're a consortium member. And I think once that started flowing, there was a lot of thoughts and engagement that included the public, which kind of reminded me of some of our WEIC meetings in the past where it was very mixed. Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think Karen Eller had a few points that she was making. I had some questions as well as, hey, can we jump in during the meeting and ask questions, or if we're not a consortium member? And I've stuck with what we've been through of no at public comment, but I know, like you were saying with we did let people make comment. We just have to be careful when we have such a packed schedule that we make time. And I also,
yeah, I mean, we barely have time for all the consortium members, right, to speak. So I think, I mean, I like, it can be a little overwhelming and stressful when you start seeing the chat go, but I think it's good because we can record it, we can revisit it if we miss things that we can't surface. So I like that, but I also do feel good about sort of in the course of the meeting, sort of saying, you know, do consortium members have questions, and really saving the verbal portion for the public comment. Ray, I'm going to speak to your second thing about moving or rotating the placement of public comment. I'm going to give Matt credit for saying maybe we should push up the public comment to before these presentations, and I didn't bite on that, and perhaps should have, but I'm yeah, I think what do you guys think about the idea of not having public comment? Public comment at the end. I mean, it's sort of, go ahead.
Some of my other groups, we do public comment in the beginning of the meeting, and it does kind of help if someone mentions something that aligns with the conversation that is on the agenda. It does help that conversation move forward, versus if it's at the end and it's like, oh, we just talked about that, that's a good point, maybe we'll bring it back up the next time or discuss it further. But it does lend the flow a little bit better. And also, as another piece of feedback, is people said that sometimes they felt rushed. So at the end, they're like, people are already ready to go, and so they felt like they might not be heard as well as they would if people are present in the very beginning or at another portion of the meeting instead of the very end.
Yeah, I've heard cases for both, definitely. I've heard, you know, folks, a lot of school boards have moved it to the front so people can speak to the agenda. But then I've heard people say, I want to respond to the things I'm hearing the school board discussing right now. I want to speak after that. So it's kind of, there's usually objections no matter which way you do it. I like Fran put a comment here. Fran, if you can even speak to that if you like, but the idea of
sure. I think a lot of times there can be people who offer public comment that I don't mean to be impolite, but can really how should I say, they like to hear themselves talk, and it can be very controversial, and what ends up happening is they completely derail the flow of the meeting and the objectives of the meeting. So it could be that you build in a section at the beginning of the agenda where you follow up with public comment from the previous session, or have a period after public comment where the consortium can respond. But I would discourage, you guys are as good as I am at this stuff, but I would discourage having public comment during the meeting, because it just can really derail. I've seen it happen a number of times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would either be the beginning or the end, for sure. And I like the idea of having time to sort of acknowledge, you know, that we're responding to things that previously surfaced. I know having a 2-month gap, I don't know if that's going to still feel right 2 months from now, but
no, I agree. And I've seen, there's an absolute strategy in professional learning where they call it the parking lot. Well, let's put that in the parking lot, you know what I mean? And then it never, like, people quickly realize that this is a tool, like setting up a commission to kick the can down the road, or just to mute the, so I think it's extremely important to acknowledge public comment, but it's the question is, what's the best time to do that?
Well, to your point too,
So,
Tizzy, about it being 2 months in between, is it maybe possible to post on the website? Like if we had a question from a meeting and then our response, so people can go back and view it there.
Haley's nodding, so that's always a good sign.
yeah,
Red.
that's Tika. I was going to suggest something similar to Tika, and there's not a singular strategy. There are strategies that haven't been deployed. It's not just about asking questions; it's being able to share ideas, to be able to help to give input, which is really important. So, it's because at the end of the day, the success of the legislative process is going to also be influenced by the level of perceived engagement or the lack thereof from the public. That and so I think that how this gets the different strategies that haven't been thought about. I think that we should be very creative. I agree that when you have a big public commission and to have people that are not on the commission participate as though that they are throughout the course of the meeting, it's going to become unmanageable, particularly as things heat up. So I agree with that, but there are ways to structure the agenda more than just the comment period. There are opportunities to kind of create it, treat it like a workshop for a section of the meeting where the public is offering ideas. And I think that, back to the whole question around justice, we have to be really mindful of the balance of power and how power gets shared.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe that's a planning line item, is sort of, public engagement in the full meetings. And I think that would obviously sort of model and apply to work groups, or something that we need to have conversations with our work group chairs about. Just how we align on what we decide, or what approach we decide in terms of
I will say that
acknowledgement response.
yeah, the educator group is so small that we kind of pull everybody in, but as you get bigger and into the funding and into the social determinants, there's such big groups that it's hard if everybody jumps in and starts talking. So
yeah, it's good to have just some guardrails in place. I think, to make sure that it's manageable, but and it can be very difficult when someone's on the other end of not feeling heard because someone leaves the meeting or time runs out. That but just, of course, we want to do our best to not do that, but we also want to keep things moving. And so I was pretty pleased with our ability to do that last night, but always room to improve. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? I think, Haley, did you have any, do you have, I know you exported the chat and then there were some things that were spoken. What is our strategy for compiling those for response? I think we were just talking in the chat about having sort of a document that kind of highlights and responds. So I guess this would give us an opportunity to pilot that.
Yeah, I was quickly just thinking about it last night and this morning about how to do it. And I was just going to start by looking at the chat, pulling out all the relevant questions from consortium members and members of the public, kind of if there was a question, was it a comment? And then if we can answer it, sort of have an answer column with a question mark, and we can circulate or send it around to get answers for people. And then I was thinking about talking to Abby, who took minutes yesterday, and seeing if she captured anything that wasn't in the chat and just adding it to that document. That was how I was going to start.
Yeah. Ray, you unmuted.
I don't want to cut her off.
Oh no, that was just my initial thought, but happy to hear feedback and thoughts about that.
I have a question. Is there a I mean, I should probably know the answer, but I don't. Is there a website? I mean, is there a way to create a forum, an electronic forum where there's dialogue going on all the time? You know how to do this stuff, Tizzy, in your other life. Come on.
Like, oh no. Yeah, I mean, I have some ideas. I've seen, I mean, I think again, it's like, how much do we manage it? Like, do we want to have a document where it's totally free flowing? That could be a cool thing to see. Or you could do something like, I don't know, this is a very managed version, but like, you know, the department with the school reopening committees, there was an email address and people were able to send things there as they wanted. And then on a weekly basis, we would compile those comments and those were linked, added spreadsheet from a website. So like there, and that was like, I would say that's sort of like the very controlled, manageable version where comments are received, documented, made available in a public space, versus maybe something like a Google Doc where people can be talking to each other. I'd have to look into that as an engagement tool. I would actually sort of wonder if Sarah has any expertise or has any exposure to those types of techniques, but I'm pretty Google Doc basic.
I'll ask Sarah Bragg or Brooke. Sarah Brooke has any ideas either, but
Now, take her hand.
I can talk to Prague.
But there's so many sort of open government engagement tools out there, to be honest, that I'm sure we could find one that is appropriately manageable for our purposes, you know, that would give people a way, you know, a more accessible way to weigh in, especially as our plans start to crystallize. So I think that's a good idea. I think that would be another thing for us to just be looking into. What are some public engagement, sort of live, permanently live public engagement tools that we could utilize? Great idea.
This is just off the top of my mind. I literally just thought about this, but town halls are becoming increasingly more popular. So what if there was interim town halls where the agenda was public comment, you know, it's specifically designed in between meetings where people could, the problem is having another meeting, but but I would, at the same time, I would really encourage maybe just 5 or 10 minutes of a quick synopsis of what the consortium's doing. Because a lot of times when you see these things, the presenters consume the entire public comment period. So like really strictly. And the other thing is maybe, you know, talking about some protocols or norms, like talk moves. Like how do you, like we do with students, how do you phrase comments in a way that might be challenging what the previous person said, but at the same time are respectful, you know? But a town hall might be an opportunity to bring people in an authentic way to get their thoughts. Because I think Ray makes a really good point that at some point the public's going to engage with this, and it's we're either going to hear from them in the process and be able to respond to it effectively, or it's going to blow up in legislative hall.
Yep, absolutely.
I like the idea.
So we want to hear. We want to hear it. We want to hear as much as we can beforehand. I'll tell you, because the ones that people think are, however people are characterized, those are the ones that are coming to legislative hall. Oh, they're coming.
Or blowing up the phone of their legislator. And it doesn't take many to do that and completely derail something that seems like it's all wrapped up and done. So we do.
And I'm one of them.
I know. That's why you're on the consortium. Yeah.
I have to say, Ray, that your comments are always very thoughtful, very respectful, and concise. You know, so they're really appreciated.
I agree.
I would definitely.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm trying to contain myself.
I know. They don't know.
You don't want to do that.
It's not going to last long, but I'm doing the best I can.
Tika, I think you want to.
With the thoughts of the town hall, I also like having them with like a couple specific questions initially that they're responding to, or topic, and then open it up. So maybe like whatever has been our most pressing question, or question that's been asked the most, that they kind of speak to that, and then it kind of opens up to what everyone else has the question. Because if it's just fully opened up to the public, I've also been where it kind of sits for crickets for a second. So then at least that's a way for the conversation to start and be guided and then open up and go wherever it wants to from there.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a really cool idea. And you're right, Fran, that's been sort of a growing thing because we can all log on and participate. And I remember doing the real world town halls during the WEIC era where we would just do a quick presentation and then just listen. But I think it would certainly look a lot differently. I mean, I think right now at school boards, we're seeing 1 to 2, maybe even 3-hour public comment period. So people are, when they're aware of the opportunity to speak to these really important things, are doing it. And I think I really like the idea of having a public comment only session. And I think the nice thing is that just like when we did it in the real world, you know, of course the entire consortium is welcome to be there, but it was sort of a thing where we would have a hand, you know, whoever was able to kind of facilitate, be present, represent the consortium could host it. And then of course we have all these great tools to record so that we can all have access to what is said. I think that's an excellent idea that sort of goes in the bucket of engagement tools. Probably I would think would be really useful between October and December for us because, you know, we've openly stated we're going to be putting draft priorities on the table in October. And then wanting to hear from folks as we go through the process of finalizing those.
There's a really good
districting. Mm-hmm.
There's really good tools that you can use like Jamboard or Linowit, where like Tika was saying, if you pose a question, you can have people synchronously type onto a canvas, a board, their comments and thoughts, and then pull from those, you know, who you turn to, or like if there's 7 people are saying the same thing, then that becomes the focus of the conversations, and it gets everybody engaged rather than 2 or 3 people who, you know, are hogging the mic or whatever.
If anybody has any specific like tools like that you think we should be looking into, make sure to pop it in the chat so we can save it and sort of do the research on that. Yeah, the poll function for Zoom for sure. I know we talked a little bit about that before, but I think that engagement piece we're going to be evolving that, so we should have that be a regular part of this discussion and do the legwork in between these meetings. Yeah, Fran, you know all the tools. I will have to look into some of these. Maybe we can demo them in a future planning session.
Zoom has its own whiteboard too. You can use Zoom to do the same thing.
Well, they don't usually disable it because it's usually taken advantage of by Zoom bombers. I feel like we do often. I don't know. Seems like it's oftentimes the thing that gets used to draw things that nobody wants to see. Menti. Okay, cool. Well, so it seems like we have a strategy for compiling. Haley and Abby pulling that together, and maybe if you want to have that be like a Google Doc or something where I can log into it with you, but however you want to proceed, we can do that. And I think we'd be looking probably not to be able to offer any kind of response memo probably until like the following week. I say that in part because I'm going to be on vacation, but what do you guys think? Is that unreasonable? To have a week delay, week or 2? Cool. I mean, those are most of the thoughts I had in the aftermath. Anybody else have any particular things that are pressing thoughts? You can always email about it.
I think something just to think about with the public engagement, it's super important, but it's a huge, it does end up being a really big lift in capacity. And that's honestly why it doesn't get sustained. Yeah. We need to think about how and who, like,
right, because then people don't get hurt.
And can do it consistently.
Yeah. Well, do you have any? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Tika.
That people were kind of asking, we touched on a little bit this earlier when we were talking about the YouTube, but on our website, we house a lot of documents and stuff from our meetings, but they were asking about audio from our meetings, or if it was a video or a transcript, but something else in addition to. So I'm imagining maybe something like what DOE did with the reopening group. So like they on their page after the meeting, they posted the link to the YouTube. Then they also posted like a transcript of the chat, which I don't think is necessary. But then there was like some other piece, maybe it was the documents, but they were asking if there was some type of audio piece that could go with what we're posting on our website.
I think it's just the video, right?
We have the Zoom video and we also have an audio file. So if,
do we need to start a YouTube?
I mean, I was thinking for now I could just post the videos on the website, like sort of under the meeting materials. You would just be able to then click, just like you see meeting minutes, you could click on the Zoom video and it could download or pop up or whatever for now.
I think that's kind of what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. But yeah, I think so as you kind of, as we start to pull together some of these engagement ideas, I do think let's make sure that we are thinking about them in terms of what capacity is needed to like really have them be fully validated. Because again, you're right. If we're just taking in a ton of stuff and then not really doing anything with it, I think that will also dissatisfy folks, understandably. Cool. Anything else? We took a little longer than I thought we would. I don't think we have any members. Amazing that the public doesn't wish to continue to engage with our planning meetings. They're so interesting. But okay, cool. No one has anything else? I think we are good, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. But talk to you sooner, I'm sure. All right.
Have a great vacation, Tizzy, and do not work.
I'll try.
Have a great vacation.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone have a good one.
Bye. Good night.